Hey Tim, how are you today?
I am fine, thank you. Enjoying the beautiful fall weather here in the southwest part of the United States. How are you doing?
Well, I want you to check this shirt I'm wearing. I I made a decision. Get it? We're talking about decision making today, right?
Right.
I made a decision that I'm going to um, object to fall coming. I want summer to stay, so I'm wearing one of my Hawaiian shirts.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's funny because it's totally unpredictable, but at the same point, I'm one of those people that love the fall rituals and ceremonies, the smell of the green chilies roasting,
Yeah.
the all of the things people do, and it's hard to figure out what you want to do with that short amount of fall that we have.
Well, and it's so beautiful. Last weekend, my wife and I met some friends up in Telluride, and that drive up through those mountains with the aspen changing color, just magnificent. So I share your love of the beauty of our country here. So,
Great, great.
but let me ask you this: our topic today is on decision making. It's especially in the world of project management where decision making is a constant. I'm just betting strongly that you, Tim, have decided on a good story to kick us off.
Oh yeah. So early in my consulting work, I was sent in to do exploration, and as a project manager and as a business and financial analyst, I worked with executives a lot. And these executives had been like managing the decisions of major corporations for like 20 or 30 or 40 years. And I was fascinated by how these decisions were made so easily and effectively. And I wondered, how come some people have struggles with it and how come others don't? And I actually talked with one I became a close friend with, a chief information officer of a paper and lumber corporation up in the Pacific Northwest. This was a company that was about 150 years old, so very staunch, very traditional. And he said, well, it gets to be a habit. He said, it took me a little bit of time to find the rhythm of a decision, but once I felt the way a decision was to go, it it just become natural. So I assumed at that point, the decisions were muscle memory. But then as I pursued this, I learned it wasn't the habit that made the decisions, it was the 30 years of learning how to make decisions that actually made it so easy for him.
And I'll bet if you were to ask him directly what his what his win column looks like, I bet he would still be batting just barely above 50%, even after 30 years.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And again, we'll talk about this later in the show, but in my research and in my readings, the results of decisions are not what we think they are. We're going to have to explore a lot of things. And one of the things I'd like to talk to you about are good and bad decisions and effective decisions, and whether or not making a decision and sticking with it is the best thing.
Well, and I think also if I were a brand new project, and I say this every podcast, I think if I were a brand new project manager listening to us, I can rest assured at the beginning of this podcast that in making my decisions, don't have to be right 100% of the time.
Oh, certainly, certainly, certainly. Yeah. And that was one of the big aha moments of myself. Um, Going from being just a manager to be a project manager leader, all of a sudden it wasn't being right or making the decision correctly. It was deciding which decision to make right now, which became more important to me.
Well, and not only that is we then get into the realm of yes, several decisions, several courses of action are open to us. but which could be the most effective? Is there such a thing as an effective decision, or is there such a thing as several effective decisions from which we choose one, i.e. which we decide amongst the decisions, right?
So let's explore this. You use that word effective. Now, I have an explicit understanding of effective. I'd like to hear yours and see how they match. What do you call effective?
Well, I think effective, you only know if it's effective if you can judge it by its results. So if I'm making a decision now in terms of some momentous aspect of my project, I don't really know it's effective until I see it 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe 1 or 2 or 3 months down the road. But I think there are some thought process around sort of how to go about it. Not necessarily the steps, perhaps the steps, I don't know, but some sort of thing that allows us to say, okay, the decision I am about to make will be more effective if I kind of follow these sorts of premises. One, I think, is just to concentrate on what's important. If I understand what's important and concentrate on that, then I can push aside a lot of the other ideas or thoughts that come into, try to come into bear and crowd out good decision making. So that would be my first aspect of an effective decision. It begins with concentrating on what's important.
I used to call that necessary.
Oh, yeah.
Necessary, and I use this as a litany in my classes. I would say necessary means 2 things. It ensures project success, and it minimizes project failure. Mm-hmm. And so I look at every change and I look at every decision and I say, does it support success? Does it minimize failure? And just like your approach, I think you and I see eye to eye on that. There's another side of effective that I want to explore too, and I want to propose to you. So we have effective decisions. We also use this word effective in meetings, like effective meetings. And if you look at the clinical or the academic definition, it says an effective meeting meets its objective. Yeah. We did what we said we set out to do. Now, can you use that same definition for an effective decision? It sounds like yes, from what you described, but give me what your perception is.
Well, I think that's exactly correct. For example, one of the things that I would want to know is, if I'm presented as a project manager with a decision that has to be made, I want to understand what that decision is all about and what the underlying realities are behind it in order to be able to satisfy the eventual outcome. So I think it has a parallel in what you just kind of described through effective meetings.
Yeah. Objectives are purpose.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is, if I understand the purpose of this decision, I'll probably make a better one.
Well, not only that, and I am famous for having staff come to me and say, we need to make a decision. And based on how they present it to me, I help them to dig deeper. And often I send them away to make the decision that it shouldn't be up to me. Often we end up making effective or ineffective decisions because we're making them at a level that we shouldn't be making them. We are perhaps not equipped with the details in order to be able to pull off that decision.
Yeah, it's the drama of the continually successful worker. You always give the work to the people who are the busiest, right? Yeah. And I can just imagine seeing a bunch of workers just throwing you questions and you deciding and spouting responses constantly.
Well, and think about that. Talk about stroking the ego of a project manager. They're the ones making the decisions. And yet, how does that hobble them in terms of really making the solid strategic ones? Because they are inundated with these smaller ones that really should be handled by the staff that are encountering them.
Yeah, delegation does not make us weak.
Right.
It allows us to focus on the more impactful work that we should.
The other part of when I was kind of looking at this, and I looked at some an article in the Harvard Business Review, and I think they took it almost directly from Peter Drucker's writings. And they also talked about the fact that an effective decision is one that's also based on principles, although there are sometimes you make it based on pragmatism. But, and I think you used the word values earlier in this discussion. So values or principles, maybe ethics, always come to play in an effective decision.
It just so happens I have a definition of pragmatism. Now, this is synchronicity. This was not staged or planned. I was going to
Not
talk about
staged.
this anyway. Here is the definition of pragmatism. It considers words and thoughts as tools and instruments for prediction, problem solving, and action. You want a decision because of the action it causes, not because of the output of the decision, but the action, it happens. So pragmatism says these words and thoughts are great. They get us to what's important, the forecasting, the resolution of conflicts and issues, and what do we need to do next?
Well, and let me offer this. You don't have a decision until action takes place. Otherwise, it's just a nice to have or a nice intention, or, you know, the world is being lived by people who have best intentions, but never carry anything out. So a decision is good when it is carried out. I think it's the action that takes the decision towards that outcome is the definition, the full definition of an effective decision.
That sounds very good. So we're making decision making sound really easy. Is it really that easy, or is a decision sometimes difficult? And what makes decisions difficult sometimes?
Oh, I think there's any number of factors. One is accountability. If I make this decision, everybody's looking at me. And if I make this decision and we go forward and it's the wrong decision, I'm the one that's going to come back after. And I think there's that fear of accountability. But I think there's one more, at least in my experience that I've seen. There's also something that I like to label Fomo, which is it's kind of one of those words, fear of missing out. So if I make decision A, but I also had the opportunity to make decision B, what would have happened had I made decision B? Am I missing out on something better? And so I think people end up in this kind of dance of what's best, and am I accountable, and who's going to be looking at me? And as a result of that, they end up being paralyzed with over analysis of how it is that they're going to carry out this decision. Your thoughts?
Yes. Let me add two more reasons why they're tough. Number one, we make decisions emotionally.
Ah, yes.
We make decisions with the unconscious part of our brain.
Yep.
And and they lead us into unintended consequences, right? I fight, flight, or freeze, right? I respond quickly because we're urgent, right? And only when we slow down and we take a breath and we actually engage our intellectual mind do we have that ability to really do that analysis that helps us make a better decision. Now, the problem is this intellectual analysis can be better, but it's more complex and it takes more time, and we don't like that. We get confused by logic. We get confused by ration. We get confused by just talking and talking and talking and talking. We know that too much talking eliminates the decision. So we have these things going on as well as what you're talking about, that fear.
Well, and I tell you, sometimes the logic, because you and I are project managers in the IT field. So our first go-to is logic. and we can, as analytical creatures, we can end up paralyzing our decision making to death if we, if we look at every single possible outcome, and therefore not make a decision. And as one boss once told me, to not make a decision, or even to not make a decision quickly enough, is to make a decision.
Right. That was Geddy Lee with Rush too.
Okay.
Even if we choose not to decide, we still have made a choice.
But I found, I was smiling when you're talking about the fact that our decisions are sometimes or often emotional, and therefore they get in the way. And I was trying to think, I made a decision over 40 years ago on a marriage partner. And I can tell you, I didn't do a lot of logic. It was mostly emotion, and it was a great decision in my case. So
That's amazing. That's wonderful.
yeah.
It is brilliant that we can make these decisions. Let's throw in another term and have fun with this for a little bit. Is there such thing as a perfect decision? Can you actually get a decision? Have you ever had a decision that was exactly right?
Oh, I suspect I have. I'm not quite sure I can think of one right now. Well, the one I just stated, the emotional decision that resulted in a marriage partner,
Right.
turned out to be exactly right. But I'm trying to think from a project management perspective. I used to be with one of the big four accounting firms, and there was a decision: do you stay with that? Not accounting firms, consulting firms. If you stay with that, or do you go out on your own? I chose to go out on my own. Would I have been better off staying in the consulting firm? I don't know. So did I make the perfect decision by going out and becoming my own independent contractor for the last, let's see, since 2003? So for a lot of years. Was it a perfect decision? I don't know. It was the best of what I understood at that time.
Right. Right. Let me give you an example. The director of the state agency where I was working at the time in the late 1990s brought me into the office, and he said, "Your friend, who's the current IT director, is wanting to leave. And how do I keep him?" And I didn't even think that I've noticed in 3 times in my life, I didn't think I responded. And for some reason, it was great. I said, "No, let him leave. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to become the IT director. We're going to offer him a consulting contract. And that's what he wants. He wants to grow and learn, and he'll give an opportunity to work under us. He'll give us continuity. So you'll have what you need. We have the best of all perfect worlds." I don't know how I came to that. I don't know how that happened. I've been dissecting that for 15 years, and I still don't understand how that perfect decision occurred.
Yeah, and I think sometimes our thought process just meets with whatever occurs at the time. So it's like circumstances and our thought process come together, and they form that perfect, I'm going to say that perfect decision, not the perfect storm, because I think the perfect storm is something that we don't want to get into. But in terms of decision, I think sometimes opportunity meets circumstance, and there you are.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you totally. I think there are methods. Now, what I have learned is we can actually increase our odds of getting close to a perfect decision if we find a method that works for us, and if we follow it enough times and refine it over maybe 1 or 2 decades, and it becomes habit and instinctual. That's where we're getting to where this executive that I talked about was. It's not that he did not know how he made that decision. It was just tacit. He got to it because he'd done it so many decades that it was just like pouring himself a cup of coffee.
But did he, in fact, predetermine a process that he would follow and get better at? I'm suspecting not. I suspect that through the natural course of events and decision making, his kind of his inner being kind of took over and said, intuitively, if I do it this way, it'll work out better than if I do it this way. because I was having trouble with what you, not with the concept you were laying out, because I truly believe that, but I was having trouble understanding from myself. Did I, in developing a method for decision making, actually consciously think through a process? And I'm thinking, no, I've spent 30, almost 40 years managing projects. I've made bad decisions. I've made good decisions. I've made logical decisions. I've made gut feel decisions. I've made ones that came under pressure, ones that I had a lot of time. And so I think all of those things helped me to kind of develop an intuitive process, but I'm not sure I consciously thought through a process.
So here's what I did early on. Okay. Now, you have to remember, I was newly minted for business school and I was reading all the theory. And so I was very, very theory focused. And what I found was about 6 or 7 different ways to make decisions. Some of them were very big problem solving tools like Polya, a Berkeley professor. Some of them were business experts like Drucker. Let's focus on Drucker. And this is what I did. I said, you know, I like Peter Drucker, and he's sort of like the way I was. And he would break down his decisions into 3 parts. The first part, what needs to be done and what's right for the business. Again, that pragmatic thing. He just lays it down. Answer those questions. Number 2, what are the action plans? What type of responsibility do we need for these decisions, right? Not just making the decisions, but the follow-up. What's the responsibility for the communications? Because a decision has to do with communications. And focusing on opportunities and not problems. That seems to be a little bit of an outlier for the rest of his model, but he threw it in there. What he was doing was he's saying, I'm gathering all the information here, and I'm turning that knowledge into something in the future that is actionable. And so I took this model and I tried it out 3 or 4 times, and I said, that feels natural. Let me continue to do it this way. And then I promptly forgot. I forgot that method. I forgot that tool.
You know, the managers that I have worked for, who in my mind were the best decision makers, were, and you just touched on it with what Drucker said in his 3rd point, they tended to be much more strategic and almost generic in their way they approached the situation, so that the outcome would be much more satisfying to the problem at hand, rather than just solving the problem.
Yes, yes, yes. It's that context.
Yeah.
It's that strategy. You're not just taking another step. You're taking another step in the right direction. And that's why he asked that question early on. What's right for the business, not just what's right for this decision.
Can I share you one of the most simplistic methods that I do know I use in decision making in the steps?
Please do.
First of all, I define the problem. I kind of touched on this earlier when I had staff come to me, and I kind of asked them questions until they can define the problem perfectly, or at least succinctly. But I think a lot of times managers or decision makers, project managers, go after trying to solve something that they haven't even yet fully defined. It's one thing not to have all of the information you need to make the decision. It's quite another thing not to fully understand the problem that you're trying to solve.
That's right. That's right. We have a problem down where we're building a building. Okay, let's go get our shovels.
Yeah.
What if it's not a shovel problem? Exactly. Exactly.
Someone spilled coffee in the blueprints. We need another copy of the blueprints. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Human nature is human nature. Ready, shoot, aim, you know? And
Yeah.
and again, it's this emotions getting in the way of the intellect. I tell my students constantly, even today, slow down, take a breath, think it through. It
Yeah.
it actually does change the whole perspective of the problem and therefore the whole direction of the decision.
Well, and also back to some of the more senior good decision makers that I've encountered, I think one of the things that I've also seen them do as part of their stepwise refinement of decision making is I think they look at a situation and they say, is this kind of a generic situation? In other words, has our company or our project faced something like this before? Maybe not exactly like this, but something like this so that I can apply principles that we've used in the past. Or alternatively, is this a very unique situation that I have to now apply a different approach to because we haven't seen this before? And so I think that also lends itself into that good strategic decision making that ends up in becoming an effective decision result.
Right. Wherever we can we apply our lessons learned? Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, and I want to get back to this part, and you're big on this, the whole ethics part, the whole idea is that, if you're in a situation, what's right, what's right, what's not correct. And I just talked to my accountant, my tax accountant yesterday in a situation I was dealing with. And I said, you've known me long enough. Don't take me to the line, and whatever you do, don't let me cross the line. I don't know exactly what's right. Pragmatically, yeah, we can make out better if we make the decision this way. But from my perspective, I would rather not achieve the most benefit as long as I can stay well within the bounds of what's permissible, especially with what's legal. But it's one of those things where ethically, I don't want to cross that line. I don't even want to come up to the line. And that's just one example. I think as project managers, we get faced with those sorts of decisions a lot as well. And we need to have those boundaries set for us within ourselves to say, how close can I come to that line and still feel that I've ethically served my customer and my corporation properly?
Yes. Risks compound, and also decisions upon decisions add complexity. And as you add complexity, you add risk. It's just a natural thing. And again, if you want to keep your teeth, you brush your teeth. If you want to keep healthy, you do the healthy things. If you want to maintain your weight, eat and exercise and sleep in the manner that you know it does. And these are the ways we make good decisions. It's all what we're talking about here. We know this.
Yeah.
We know what is good and right. We know what a good or effective decision is. Now, it does take practice.
It does. And I think even that we know what's good versus, or what's right versus not right. I think there's also that line that says we know what's right versus what's acceptable. Sometimes what's acceptable within our own conscience is not right.
There's that boundary between being right and being satisfied.
Yeah.
Being right is being right up to that line. Yeah, I'm right. I'm still right. I'm still right. I haven't crossed the line. But being satisfied means that the world will never observe me as being close to that boundary.
Yeah. I'm about to cross this crosswalk on a very busy street, and the light for me is green. Therefore, I am right to walk across. Even if that car coming at 40 miles an hour is not going to stop, I'm still right.
And we all know how that comes out.
We all know how that ends. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about go ahead.
You go ahead.
I was going to say, how about the fact that, we talked earlier about the fact that a decision isn't really a decision until there's action that comes with it. Do you think that in part of the question you're asked, the process of making the effective or the perfect decision, what's your process? Do you think the fact that that action follow-up is just as much a part of that perfect or effective decision in terms of who we select, perhaps timeframes that we lay out, the method in which we are to carry out the decision? Do you think that all comes into play as well?
Yes. Let me give you an example that will surprise you. Deming-Short. It's a continuous improvement cycle, is it? It's another decision-making tool, right? You use the plan as the, what's the decision? You use the do, which is the application of the decision. You use the check and the act to do just what you said. I want to go back and make sure that the results were expected so I can back that out if I have to. And so Deming-Short actually are good examples of how to build a proper decision-making matrix if you ever wanted to do it.
Plan, do, check, act. Yeah. No, plan. Yeah, I got that right.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Plan, do,
Exactly.
Yeah, plan.
Exactly.
And I was trying to think about this too. So to test the effectiveness, and again, I'm not going to stop at just the action. I'm going to also stop at the conclusion of the decision-making process and test to see the outcome against the decision that was made. To see it's something, we talked about sprints. Well, in IT, we talk about sprints and all that kind of stuff. Every sprint has a retrospective, right? To see what did we do well, where could we have improved, how did we come to the conclusion we had planned 2 weeks ago when we started the sprint, all of those sorts of things. This is almost like the same thing. I made this decision. Now at the very end, I'm looking back. Did I make an effective decision, or did I act appropriately along the way so that the decision I made ended up in the expected outcome?
Well, and the benefit of doing it that way is continuous improvement, because you're not just making better and better decisions, you're evaluating the way you make decisions, and you have an opportunity to tweak what you're doing, which means every decision can help you get better and better. This is part of the standard. This is how project management would like us to be. It takes a little bit of effort and time. But if this is important, and it is, especially as you become more and more senior, the decisions you make are more impactful. So you will find yourself saying, okay, let me make this decision a little more carefully.
And I think where we blow it as project managers, and I've seen this so often, is we do our lessons learned exercise, but when do we do it? So far after the fact that we forget what had happened to get to those processes. And so sometimes we're our own worst enemies. We make effective decisions, so we think. We act on them appropriately, so we think. But then when we go to test the outcome, we don't remember.
That's right. Now that brings us to an interesting conversation. What do you think does get in the way of a perfect decision? What are the major blockers to making really good decisions?
Well, I've got a few ideas on that one, but I want you to start this time. What in your mind gets in the way of effective or perfect decisions?
I'll leave it at two and then let you talk.
Okay.
No, number one is conflict.
I never thought of that one.
Emotional attachment to the outcome.
Yeah.
You can also put bias there too, right? Conflict is a type of bias. Conflict, well, I should say conflict and bias go hand in hand. How about constant reprioritization of the work? You're allowing the work to change so much, and you're in such a chaotic environment that, basically any decision is not going to make any forward movement. You're basically spending all your energy just managing the process of management instead of getting work done.
Well, I think that is the exact opposite of decision. And I think exactly that's an indecision, because if you're constantly reprioritizing, you're not very comfortable in your decision-making process, at least not in that circumstance. A couple of thoughts I had was sometimes we just don't have all of the facts or all of the parameters within which to make that decision. So we have to kind of make a guess. And I'd like to talk about this a little bit as we go along too. But I think in doing that, sometimes we make assumptions, and maybe we're too junior in our decision-making capabilities at this point to make important decisions based on assumptions. And so I think sometimes we get into those situations where we make assumptions and they turn out to be wrong assumptions. And another one that I thought of was, and I've seen this from some long-term project managers, there's an arrogance. I've made decisions like this in the past and I've been right so many times. Of course, I'm going to be right this time. And what happens is, pride comes before a fall, and sometimes they fall pretty hard.
Hubris, right?
Hubris, that's a better word. Yes.
Yeah, I love the word hubris because it attacks us all. And again, if you study the Roman mythology, the god Hubris has a dancing partner called Nemesis.
Oh, there you go.
Exactly. And hubris is just this. I know. It's the entry of the ego to step in and say, I'm important. And this is the great risk. You got to put the decision above what you personally are and feel. It has to be separated. And that's why I embrace pragmatism. I put the tools and the process in place, and I allow it to make the decision. So I basically, by doing that, I'm affirming that there is a chance that a better decision can be made because I'm relying on experts, I'm relying on collaboration, and innovation in a group always beat an individual expert.
Oh, absolutely. And I was thinking too, the whole idea of hubris and arrogance also, or arrogance, I guess they're synonyms in many ways. But I think also project managers who are so sure of themselves, who don't listen to the counsel of others, particularly those who are on their team who have not yet attained project management status. I think I have learned to listen to the developers, to the business analysts, to whoever it is, because they're in the trenches. How often have I come to make a decision and I've relied on facts and figures that are brought to me by those people who are dealing with it every day, and as a result may change my mind because of how they convinced me of something that's happening on the floor that I'm not aware of. So again, hubris, saying these people don't count, they're beneath my level and therefore don't have decision-making capabilities like I do, costs you.
Oh yeah, it does. You're limiting your access to information.
Yeah.
You literally are. In hubris, your scope all of a sudden goes like this. And that's all you have to work with. If you let that go and let go of, your personal perception of self-worth and say, I'm not even in this discussion. This is work discussion. This isn't Tim discussion. All of a sudden it goes open like that. What if the janitor knows something I don't? Sure. What if the person bringing the coffee in knows something? They know where the good donuts are, That's the important thing.
That is the important thing, because all we need is another donut around 10 o'clock in the morning, right? To help those synapses fire, right?
Now here's what we have to look at. Let's get into the bigger and the more scary decisions. When we get into really complex projects, and that's your domain, everything going on inside and outside the project and around the project, how do you actually make sense of it all? How do you sit back and put the pieces together? That's really amazing.
Well, I think first of all, the plan. So now I'm getting down to exactly getting away from the people side of projects and getting onto the process side. You have to have that plan. But no, you and I talked one time, and I mentioned the Ed Sullivan Show, and I'm sure there are 75% of our audience today has never heard of Ed Sullivan, but it was a TV variety show, first of all, that introduced the Beatles to America. That's where they came to, the Ed Sullivan Show. I'm getting off track here, but on the Ed Sullivan Show, every so often he would bring in I don't know if he's a magician or just an acrobat of sorts, but he could spin 12 plates at the end of pool cues at a time. And I can say that the reason I'm bringing this up is I've only ever seen that once in terms of one person in the world that could spin 12 plates at one time. So that's a long way of answering what you asked me in terms of the complexities of project management with all of its moving parts. Relax, project manager, you cannot spin 12 plates at one time. You need to look at what's most important and you begin with that. The plan helps you with that because it orders priorities, it orders prerequisites for certain tasks, but based on that, you can sort of dissect and begin to work a piece at a time. That's my only explanation.
Yes, yes. It's the two tools together. It's prioritization in small bite-sized pieces.
Yeah.
It's dumping all the picture puzzle pieces on the table and sorting them out. Now, we have different ways of sorting this out. We have models. We have a lot of them. Business, technology, and functional, right? You can actually go in, and if you're looking at a business process, you can say, okay, here's the business part, here's the technology part, and here's the functional part, how it works. And you can take one piece at a time. And something that I know that you actually grew up on is the OSI model, right? Where you have the physical infrastructure of the solution, and then you have, you know, the software infrastructure, and then you have the application layer, and then you have the business layer, and then you have the interpersonal layer. And if you can actually, when you have really complex problems, you sometimes have to break them down in these very, very interesting models. There's other models too that I'd like to introduce, and this is something that we're going to be introduced more and more into. The 7th edition of the PMBOK talks about this. Complexity and complex systems. So what you want to do when you have a really complex system, if you want to understand it, you go to the edges. You go to the edges where it's defined and it's undefined. Now, in the theory of complex fringes, they call this the littoral fringe, where the ocean meets the land. Now, it's funny because if you study this in geographical science or geography science, they say it's interesting because you find the intersection of how the land behaves over here and how the ocean behaves over here. And the ocean is the great unknown and the land is the known. And if you can actually use the beach and use what the ocean is throwing up to you at patterns, you can learn what's underneath the ocean. And that's what we do with complex systems. We look at the data, we look at the knowledge we have that's known, we look at the boundaries, and then we look at how the known space interacts with the unknown space. And by exploring this, we can learn more about the unknown.
Oh, wow. I feel like where the ocean intersected with my land, that I've just been hit by a tsunami.
Well, think about this. We've done this for 20,000, 40,000 years.
Yeah, you're right.
This is how we explore.
Yeah.
We go out in little pieces and we say, well, that's really different over there. But you know what? They have some of the same animals.
Yeah.
But there are other animals, and those big animals that, you know, they eat sort of like us, they eat there too. And we've been doing that for millennia. What we're talking about is using that same mindset for this. And this is how Agile actually works. It actually thrives in a complex environment. And it says, we know a general picture, We're on the boundary of the unknown, and we're
Yeah.
using that to explore the unknown and get information back. That's how we explore Mars. That's how we explore the stars. And that's how we explore these very complex systems.
Yeah, and I think in the underlying piece of all of this, even as we explore and even as we go out further into defining what it is that we're after in a project, the outcomes that we're after, I think there's also, besides the fact that we're moving towards that goal, there's always course corrections along the way. Because we make a decision and we try something and all of a sudden we realize that's not going to work, or it's not going to work as effectively as we need it to. And so we just correct a little bit, we make an adjustment. But had we not stepped out and made that first action, we wouldn't have known to make that adjustment.
Right. Things are always changing. Things are always changing. And so we can't expect that a decision that we made today, although it's a great and it's the best decision today, is tomorrow's best decision. And we have to embrace that.
Well, and that's why as project managers, we create a plan, we baseline the plan, we work the plan. And when we see that the plan is steering us off of our intended course, we readjust, we re-baseline, we continue on. Because, and I think I told you this before, in my way of thinking, we develop a plan. We don't develop a done. because
I love that. I love that. That's one of the greatest quotes. I'm gonna take that quote from you. That's brilliant.
You can take that. It's as long as you put Merv Jersak next to the quotation marks. But my grandfather used to say, I think it was my dad. No, maybe it was my dad. We had this old 1963 Chevy, and I'd get in there and I'd be playing with it, right? And my dad would look at me and he says, you know, you can't steer a parked car. You have to move it so that you can actually steer it. And that's how we do with projects. That's how we make our decision. We make a decision, we move forward, we steer, and then we correct ourselves. So I think your original questions was, projects can be so complex. How is it that with everything going on in a project, how is it that we can make sense of it all and make good decisions? You don't have to make good decisions based on knowing the entire project. You make good decisions based on one day at a time.
Yeah, yeah. Now, there is something to be said for having an objective. And that's
Definitely.
where you use your course correction to keep you moving towards the objective. So a combination of both of those is really what we need. And you're right. The art of a project and project management is not making the right decision. It's making these constant course corrections that get you the most effective path to where you need to go.
And I think also, if you're a project manager listening to this, don't be afraid to use your gut as well. Sometimes your gut is better than your mind. Just because you've seen it before, your logic tells you can do it this way, but something in your intuition, something in your gut says, no, we better not do it that way. So in my decision making, I use part logic, part gut all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Again, we can call that muscle memory. We can call that habit or perception or principle. But yeah, it's there. We get that sense, and that's, again, go back to my first example. I think that's part of what that executive was relying on.
Yeah,
it's just knowing through that experience.
So I brought up a thought a little while ago in terms of what happens if we don't have all the information, or we just have partial information. And I made a leap and said sometimes we use assumptions to fill in the gaps, and sometimes those assumptions, if we're not good decision makers or not experienced decision makers, sometimes those assumptions get us into trouble. What do you think? Can we make, or can we decide on partial decisions? Can we jump in?
So think about it this way, okay? You don't know how long a meeting's going to be, right?
Right.
You don't. You know that the meeting's going to be over when the decision's made, but you don't know how long that's going to take. But what do? What is the time we put on a meeting?
1 hour usually.
Right.
Or at least we usually put a definite Time frame, yes.
That's an assumption.
Yeah, it's an
And
assumption.
exactly. And you know what it does? It gets the meeting started. That's the purpose of an assumption. It allows me to start the mechanism of the analysis and review. An assumption, as long as it's recognized as an assumption and is used for this purpose, can be very effective. Now, it has to be transparent. And if you're not careful, an assumption can be perceived as a very precise estimate. And that's where we get in trouble.
Well, and I think the premise of my original question, I didn't mean it to be a trick question, but I think the premise was a little bit off. I sort of asked if what happens if we don't have all the information to make a good decision? Can we make a good decision anyway? And I think the premise was incorrect in saying what happens if we don't have all the information. I'm going to say now correctly that we hardly ever have all the information to make a good decision.
Yeah, yeah. But that's waiting for, that's waiting for the perfect weather. I'll wait for these 20 variables to be in place. No.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a pilot, and then I've also read this more recently, and that is that a flight on its way to the Middle East from New York, if it's off 1 degree, will end up in Moscow. I think those were the parameters, but it was literally that much if there are no course corrections or adjustments along the way.
Wow.
So can you imagine flying to perfect vacation in Hawaii from New York and never making an adjustment, and suddenly running out of fuel somewhere between Hawaii and Australia?
Oh, mercy.
Think about it. I mean, that's exactly, we need to be making those course corrections.
And if we're going into an agile project, which means that we're going into an environment of constant change, this is the mindset that we're going to have to adopt. We're not going to make any firm decisions. We're going to be working as navigators, not people who read blueprints.
Yeah. And I suppose as the sprints go on and as we gain more and more information, we don't have to go back and revisit older information. We're building on that information. So we don't have to keep on second guessing what we thought of 3 sprints ago. Right?
Right. Exactly. So let's think back here. We started off asking each other, what do we consider an effective meeting? Have you changed a little bit of your perspective on, an effective decision? Has this discussion changed your perspective a little bit?
I think it has. I like the discussion we had around sort of a systematic approach to decision making, so that it becomes that gut level intuitive type of decision making. And I have to go back and rethink how it is that I make decisions, and perhaps look at my own systematic approach so that my decisions are better decisions, more effective at this point. What about yourself?
What I'm thinking is the most effective decisions are the ones that lead to action. That actually resonates really true to me. That allows us to collect more information to make a better and better decision, especially around our conversation of plan, do, check, act with decision making. It has to be continuous improvement. And it's interesting that you look at continuous improvement from a personal decision-making practice, and I'm looking at continuous improvement from a results focus. But decision-making, without continuous improvement is not going to be effective.
Well, and I would add to that I don't think it is a decision until action takes place.
Yeah.
I had a boss years ago that used to tell me that if I personally, as a project manager, got 60% of my decisions right, and right has kind of it's subjective as to what's right, because I think there are some decisions are better than others, but many can be right. But he said, if I got 60% of my decision right, I'd be ahead of anybody else in my field. So that kind of caught me off guard because I thought, well, wait a minute, as a project manager, I have to be making every decision right. And it's not true.
Yeah, that's again, that's another Peter Druckerism. A third of the decisions you make are going to be poor. A third of the decisions you make are going to be good. And a third of the decisions you make are inconsequential. It doesn't matter whether or not you made that decision. It's not going to have any impact.
I spend a lot of time working with business teams in formulating their requirements for new systems. And some of the requirements definition processes would take months because they were very large systems. And I often dealt with people who would come out of their day jobs and be seconded to the project as subject matter experts. And of course, this whole decision-making aspect frightened them because here they are, 20 people representing 10,000 people in the field. What if they were wrong? And I would always assure them, if I took you 20 people and set you aside and brought in 20 different people, we'd end up with a different looking system, but we'd end up with a system that works for the 10,000. So it's always one of those things. What's the best decision? What's the best repercussion as a result of what I'm doing? You know, we're human. We have variation. We're allowed to make different decisions at different points, always thinking ahead to that outcome.
Exactly. Exactly. You put a different set of people together for the same objective and for the same project, you're going to get a different scope. You cannot get away from that, but that doesn't mean one's better than the other.
Right. And the other thought I had, and you can stop me if I'm talking too much and not giving you a chance. But the other thought I had was, as project managers, we make decisions that are absolutely important, but we never really make life or death decisions. Like, I'm not an army general sending an entire troop into harm's way in war. I am fighting my own battle here as a project manager. And so I've learned over the years to not sweat the small stuff. Sometimes a decision goes wrong and you just recover.
Yep. And that's the beautiful thing. And then some days it just rains. It's we do tend to get wrapped around the wheel when we focus on the axle a lot. And that's all right. It shows we care. But at the same point, like we're reflecting here, you know, the objective is to get the work done, make as many right decisions as we are, recover as we can, and move forward. And that's the best of all worlds right there.
So do you think if you were listening to this podcast as a brand new project manager, or as one that's maybe on their second project, do you think you're feeling a little more comfortable right now?
Maybe. You know what I would think? I would think, Tim, do I have to wait for 10 or 20 years before I make good decisions? That's the first question I hear one of my students saying. And I'm saying, no, I think the decisions you make today with the information you have today are going to be the greatest decisions you can make. And then tomorrow you'll make better ones and better and better. And the action of, number one, practicing, and number two, observing the results. I like what you said there, Merv. Will actually help you improve faster than anybody else around you.
And would the decision I made in the same circumstance 20 years from now be different? Probably. Would it be better? Maybe.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I like what you also said in terms of work with what you have at the time and make the best decision you know how. And if it means going out and getting counsel, do that as well, but make the decision.
Yes, exactly.
So if I were to decide to look you up, Tim, to ask you a question that's burning in my bosom right now, where would I find you?
I'm over at LinkedIn right now. I'm tied up with some major projects, but if you ask me, I check messages and I will be happy to respond if you need a respond. If you don't see me responding and you want one, just repeat. It's not rude. It's just reminding me, and I'll reprioritize.
So Tim Jerome at LinkedIn, Merv Jersak at LinkedIn. Find us, look us up, ask us questions, and tune in again.
Yes, thanks, Merv. And thanks everybody for listening to us. Have a great day.
Great. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.